Chapter 12. The look of the rest of the town mirrored what I saw on the road leading up to it. For most of the way, the streets were useless, blocked with long lines of various cars and trucks, forcing me to go off the road some of the time. But putting the Jeep into four-wheel drive, I took the opportunity to test out its capabilities by driving around blocked streets, through yards, even knocking down some fences along the way just to get past. In a hopeless attempt to get some more information, I pulled out my tablet, clicked on the settings, and looked for a signal of any kind. Even a locked network would have been encouraging, even if I wasn't able to check out the news feeds. But as I drove, I repeatedly searched and found nothing. I automatically drove to the center of town, remembering that's where most of the convenience stores were located. I kept my mask and gloves and got out of the Jeep periodically to check for signs of life in houses that looked like the owners still might be there. Most of the lawns were overgrown and overrun with weeds. The doors were either open or kicked in, with a lot of the windows smashed as well. But one house looked like it was still maintained and had cars parked in the driveway, so I parked my Jeep in the middle of the street, not overly concerned about being in the way of any traffic. As I knocked on the door, I wondered what I would say if it actually opened. What would I think if I heard someone knocking at my door? Would I answer it? Shoot through the door? One thing's for sure, if they were hiding, it was because they either thought I was some kind of raider or a crazy person wandering around. Disappointed when no one answered, I slowly walked around the house and looked in the windows, but I saw nothing. I climbed back in my Jeep and continued driving, keeping an eye on my rearview mirror in case someone came rushing out. Just before the center of town, I came to a giant pile of burnt timbers and ash, marked with a sign in the grass that read, Park Lawn High School. I remembered the reflection on the clouds the first night Saul and I saw evidence of a large fire in the distance, and I wondered if this was the site. There were ambulances parked to the side. My old high school had made their gymnasium a makeshift clinic to cope with the overflow from the hospitals. Only the thick brick shell of the building's exterior still stood above the gray lump of ash and rubble. The streets through the center of town were no better than the roads leading there. The congestion made it hard to continue driving. If I wanted to explore it further, it would have to be on foot. When I was here years ago, the small main drag in town was full of little shops with something for everyone. Reluctantly, I parked, stopping short of the mess of tangled cars just outside the heart of the small town, and reached for my backpack. Once I was walking down the street, I wondered what on earth I would find worth taking with me. The storefronts had smashed windows and trash strewn everywhere. I tightened up the straps on my now empty backpack and continued my slow walk down the street, weaving in and out of cars, all the while checking for a signal on my tablet. I immediately recognized a large truck parked in the center of the road as the same type that had distributed supplies in my town. I just never went and got any because it seemed like the perfect opportunity to catch the flu. From the looks of things, my instincts were right. I stopped periodically to peer into buildings, only to find ransacked interiors and no signs of life. Down the street, I found an establishment that looked promising. The simple awning was stained black from ash, and the window was so covered in dust it looked whitewashed when my light hit it. The letters were still legible in bold black characters that read simply, "The Pub." Most likely that would have been looted and cleaned out, but I would have some explaining to do to Saul if I didn't at least take a peek in the bar to make sure there weren't any spirits left behind. There was a stale campfire smell to it, and like the outside, it was covered with dust and ash. I moved through the darkness to the entrance of the bar and started opening doors and checking shelves for any bottles still containing what now could be described as liquid gold. To my knowledge, there weren't many operating distilleries left. "Picked clean," I said softly. The bar almost looked how I would imagine the aftermath of a good party, minus the ash, rank air, and the simple fact there would still be power. I decided to not give up so easily, and walked toward the back of the building to the kitchen. I started maneuvering past all the twisted chairs and tables left behind. Out of habit, I looked in every corner, behind every door, in every nook and cranny, making sure no one was going to sneak up behind me. I stopped every 10 steps or so and listened to my surroundings. The faint sounds of the building were amplified by the lack of any other sounds competing for my attention. The maddening drip from the faucet in the kitchen filled the space. After rummaging through cabinets and coolers, I found nothing but the remains of moldy bread and spoiled produce. Just as I was about to turn out of the kitchen, sure it had nothing left to offer me, I noticed out of the corner of my eye a box, under a table, with the top of a bottle sticking out of it. I reached for it and slid it out slowly. The box had been sitting in a puddle, courtesy of the leaky pipes from the sink, and it tore apart as I pulled it from its hiding spot. Inside was an unopened bottle of whiskey. "Jackpot," I said, wiping off the label. Saul was right. There was no reason we should leave the safety of his property just yet. Walking out of the front door of the bar, I looked at the condition of the town, with its bleak remains, and was glad that I came without Lily. It was better that she think things were improving than to know that only a shadow was left. "Hello!" I shouted at the top of my lungs for good measure just outside the bar. I abandoned all caution as I wondered if everyone died or left. It was possible the town had been depopulated, but it was just as likely that everyone packed up and left after the roadblocks were no longer an issue. Who would want to stick around in a town that was dying? Now, knowing the state of things myself, I could start to think about heading back to the house. At least I found a few things to show for my effort, even though it wasn't reason enough to jump up and down. I didn't expect to find things roaring, but at least some signs of life would have been nice. Maybe a 24-hour cafe with free Wi-Fi. I started walking toward the Jeep and stopped after only a few steps and listened. "Nah, it's just the wind," I said, quietly looking around. I walked a few more steps, then I heard it again. Laughter. I turned quickly in the direction of a building across the street where the sound came from. I looked it over, waiting, listening to see if my suspicions were correct. It was the tallest building in town, all brick and with very large windows. One of the rooms on the top floor had a soft orange glow to it. Not so much that it would stand out, but just enough that it was noticeable among the other darker windows. The other difference was that the windows weren't broken, they were open. And then I heard it again, an almost muted, high-pitched laugh. Not like a child's, but it definitely had a squeak to it. I crossed the tightly packed street near the supply truck by climbing over hoods and finally walking on the roofs of the cars. I cringed every time I took a step from one roof to another, and the hollow thunk of the cheap sheet metal dented from my weight. Standing under the window, I could tell for certain that this was the building the sound was coming from. Now closer, I could hear, but not make out, someone talking as well. Next to the stone entrance with double thick wood doors was a brass plaque that read City Hall. Right next to the building was a large Red Cross truck. Tucked away behind that was another trailer with a large sign hung on it that said, "Flu shots here." I reached for the door to the City Hall entrance and paused when I noticed a shimmer on the ground from the small amount of light cast off the moonlit sky. The reflections came from spent bullet cartridges. But these were different than the countless others that littered almost every surface, from the sidewalk to tops of cars and up and down the street. I knelt next to them, picked one up, and smelled it. It still had a strong smell, as if it had been fired recently, and it was the same caliber that the troops used. I turned to the heavy wood door, grabbed the handle, and gave it a turn. The door opened and let out a creak that cut through the silence. I slipped in and walked down the long hallway, barely making out the walls in the dim light that spilled in the large windows. I shined my light around to get an idea of the layout. It was a long hallway, lined with closed doors to various offices of city workers. I came to one that was marked Permit Office. The room looked ransacked, with a mess of maps and other papers. On the wall were large pictures of officials with little brass nameplates next to them, the succession of mayors of this town, as well as other offices and the people who held them. The voice was louder, but still muffled, and I could only make out one or two words at a time, but nothing that made any sense. It definitely sounded like a conversation, but from what I could tell, I only heard one distinct voice. Every step on the large, old, dark stairwell creaked like one would expect in an old house. I stepped closer to the edge, trying to minimize the sound as I rounded the large posts at the landings. The door at the top opened up to a hallway, similar to the one on the ground floor, still filled with portraits of proud old guys on the wall. The floor changed from oak to one of stone. The plaque on the wall next to the door read, "Courtrooms A through C." Now the voice was clear and audible. "Checked, and yes, I believe I checked there also," the voice said, frustrated. I had to pinch myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming or imagining things. As I got closer to the voice, I started to wonder if I should just turn back. After all, I got what I came here for. I now knew that the state of things was less than desirable. Despite that feeling, I pressed on in curiosity. There was still a lot I didn't know. Perhaps this person had information about the surrounding areas or the city. Was he part of a bigger group or on his own? A flood of questions raced through my mind as I crept up on the last door. I stood frozen for a couple minutes as I considered calling it a night and backing up. But I knew when I got home I would kick myself over and over, knowing I had given up an opportunity to get some real answers. If I passed on making contact tonight, who knows when I would have another opportunity? Did I really want to meet him? I took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and entered the room.